Detective Evelyn Hart froze as the lab printer whirred to life, a single page sliding out. A DNA match that shattered nearly half a century of silence. 46 years of dead ends, dozens of detectives, a family that never stopped waiting. And now, one name. The killer wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor who had attended every search vigil. It was the early morning of April 9th, 1977, in Beckley, West Virginia, when 21-year-old Laura Bennett vanished on her way home from her night shift at Ridgeview Diner. She'd called her mother at 11:06 p.m. to say she was leaving. She never made it home. Her car, a light blue '72 Chevy Nova, was found 2 days later along a rural stretch of Route 19. The driver's side door ajar and the keys still in the ignition. Inside, her purse was untouched. Single shoe lay in the grass 10 feet from the road. The scene looked like someone had stopped her, or someone she trusted had. At first, police thought it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was missing. Within days, hundreds of volunteers joined search teams combing through dense Appalachian woods. Helicopters circled overhead. The story made statewide news. But after 2 weeks, the search was scaled back. No new leads, no body. Detective Roy Lancaster, the original investigator, described it as the case that broke this department. He kept Laura's missing person photo pinned to his office wall until the day he retired. "We looked everywhere," he said later, "but it was like she vanished into the fog." Laura wasn't just another case file. She was the youngest of 3 children, a nursing student working double shifts to support her family after her father passed. Her mother, Martha, in one. And whoever did this deserves to be seen. Fast forward to 2023. Detective Evelyn Hart, part of the West Virginia Cold Case Task Force, was combing through the archives when she stumbled upon the Bennett file. The faded box label read 1977, Beckley, unsolved. Inside, wrapped in old evidence tape, she found the original items. Laura's torn uniform sleeve, the broken keychain, and a small envelope marked trace residue. Unlike most old evidence, the items had been properly sealed. Hart immediately sent them to the state crime lab for advanced DNA analysis. Modern technology could extract genetic material from even the faintest touch. Weeks later, she got a call from the lab supervisor. "We found something," he said. Embedded in the torn sleeve was a partial male DNA profile, strong enough for testing. It was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. No matches. Hart then turned to forensic genealogy, uploading the profile to a public DNA database used for cold case investigations. 2 days later, she got a hit. The genetic family tree pointed to a single surname that Beckley locals knew well, Holloway. Hart's research led her to Frank Holloway, a retired coal miner who had lived just 2 blocks from the Bennett family in 1977. He had no criminal record, no known connection to Laura, and had died of heart failure in 2003. Still, something felt off. Old interviews revealed that Holloway had volunteered in the original search parties. He'd even been quoted in a 1977 newspaper article saying, "I just hope whoever did this gets what's coming." Hart requested a warrant to obtain a DNA sample from Holloway's son, now in his 50s, to compare for familial confirmation. The results came back a week later, a 99.8% paternal match. Frank Holloway was the man responsible for the disappearance and murder of Laura Bennett. When Hart broke the news to the Bennett family, Laura's younger brother David said nothing at first. Then, tears in his eyes, he whispered, "He lived right down the street. He came to my mom's house to pray for her." The discovery sent shockwaves through Beckley. Reporters flooded the small town. The case that had haunted the community for generations was finally solved. And the killer had been hiding in plain sight. Detective Hart stood before cameras at the official press briefing. "This case is proof," she said, "that time doesn't destroy truth. It only delays its discovery." The press conference aired across national news. Even veteran detectives who had long retired tuned in to watch. "We all thought this one would never close," one said. "Turns out it just needed someone who refused to stop looking." As the cameras shut off, Hart looked at the faded photograph of Laura Bennett, smiling in her diner uniform, unaware her image would one day become a symbol of persistence. Justice had arrived, 46 years late, but it had arrived all the same. The revelation of Franklin Holloway's guilt tore through Beckley like a storm that had been gathering for decades. The small Appalachian town, once proud of its quiet charm and tight-knit community, now found itself face to face with a betrayal that felt personal. Almost every resident remembered the search for Laura Bennett. Some had been children back then, holding flashlights in the woods beside their parents. Others had seen Holloway himself passing out flyers, comforting the grieving family, and standing in front of TV cameras, pretending to help. Detective Evelyn Hart spent the following weeks meticulously reconstructing the full chain of events from 1977. Every step Holloway took, every report filed, every missing piece of evidence was scrutinized. She discovered that in the original investigation, Holloway had been interviewed briefly as part of the search team, but dismissed immediately. He told detectives that he barely knew the girl, and that he had been at the local tavern the night she vanished. No one ever verified that alibi. When Hart dug into old personnel files, she found something strange. Holloway's name had appeared in an unrelated police file in 1981, an incident where a young woman reported being followed home from a bar. The suspect was described as a man in his mid-30s driving a pickup truck. No arrest was made, and the case was dropped. The report had been typed on a ... faded form, the name Frank Holloway written in the margins by hand. Hart's pulse quickened as she read it. "He was right there," she whispered, "right in front of them." Using newly accessible digital archives, Hart found more threads. Holloway's property records showed that in 1978, a year after Laura's disappearance, he had moved out of Beckley, selling his house within months of the case going cold. He relocated to Logan County and started working at a coal plant, living quietly until his death in 2003. Neighbors from that era described him as nice but odd. One recalled that he would avoid eye contact when Laura's case came up on the evening news. Another remembered that his garage door always stayed locked, even during heat waves when everyone else left theirs open. Hart's reconstruction of the timeline revealed the probable sequence of events. On that night in April 1977, Holloway had likely followed Laura from the diner, offering to help when he saw her car slow near the old bridge on Route 19. She trusted him. He was familiar, part of the neighborhood. When she refused his advances, the confrontation turned violent. Her uniform sleeve had torn as she fought back, and the DNA preserved in that fabric had waited 46 years to tell the story. The town's reaction was complex. Beckley wasn't just shocked, it was ashamed. For decades, they had called Holloway a good man. He'd volunteered at church, donated to charity, and helped repair fences after storms. The betrayal cut deep. Local journalist Renee Collins, who grew up in at the New River Courthouse. Reporters gathered as Detective Hart presented the official case summary to the state prosecutor. Though Holloway was dead, the state still issued a posthumous indictment, a symbolic act to close the file and formally recognize Laura Bennett as a homicide victim whose killer had been identified. "It's not about punishment," the prosecutor said. "It's about acknowledgement." Laura's surviving brother, David, attended the hearing. Outside, under a gray sky, he told the press, "He sat at our dinner table once. I was 10 years old. He helped hang missing posters for my sister. I shook the hand of the man who killed her." His voice cracked, and the silence that followed was heavier than any headline. As the days passed, Beckley's residents began to talk about what justice meant after so many years. The local high school hosted a memorial assembly for Laura, using her story to teach students about forensic progress. Her photograph was projected on the auditorium wall with the words, "Truth waits, even when we forget to look." Detective Hart became the unexpected face of perseverance. In an interview with a Charleston news station, she said, "When I first opened that file, it felt like holding someone's unfinished story. My job wasn't just to solve a case. It was to give her family the ending they were promised 46 years ago." The State Forensic Lab honored her work by naming their new genetic testing division after Laura Bennett. The plaque read, "The Bennett Unit, dedicated to every victim who waited too long." But behind the recognition, Hart couldn't stop thinking about the missed chances. The original investigators had been thorough for their time, but the lack of technology had crippled them. If DNA had existed in '77, she told a colleague, Laura's family might have gotten closure before. Her mother died. Martha Bennett had passed away in 2002, just a year before Holloway's own death. Hart often thought about that, about the cruel symmetry of it. "She died not knowing," she said softly during one of her final press briefings. "And he died thinking he got away with it." After the formal closure, Hart revisited the place where Laura's car had been found. The road had changed, widened, repaved, lined with guardrails. But the landscape still carried that Appalachian stillness, the same fog that had swallowed the truth all those years ago. She parked her car, stepped out, and stood in the cold air. Birds called from the trees, and for a moment, everything was quiet. She knelt near the ditch where officers had once scoured for clues, her gloved hand brushing the damp grass. "We found you," she whispered. The case drew national attention. Major crime networks and streaming platforms covered it under headlines like "DNA Cracks 46-Year Mystery in West Virginia." Forensic experts praised the persistence of cold case investigators who never gave up on old evidence. Dr. Malcolm Avery, the forensic scientist who processed the DNA, said in an interview, "It's incredible. A single preserved fiber, smaller than a fingernail clipping, held the answer to nearly half a century of questions. This is why we preserve everything." The public response was emotional. Letters poured in from viewers across the country, many from families still waiting for answers to their own cold cases. One read, "If Laura's case can be solved, After 46 years, maybe there's hope for us too. Back in Beckley, the police department created an annual Day of Remembrance for unsolved homicides. The first ceremony took place on the anniversary of Laura's disappearance. Her... Brother David lit the memorial candle, standing beside Detective Hart. "She was my sister, but she belongs to all of us now," he said, "because her story is what keeps us from forgetting." As the crowd dispersed, Hart stood alone for a while, watching the flame flicker. She felt both pride and sorrow, the dual weight every cold case detective carries. Solving the case didn't undo the past, but it restored something precious, the truth. In her office, she pinned a single photo of Laura Bennett to the cold case board, stamped "Solved." Beneath it, she wrote a note in blue ink. "Justice doesn't follow a clock. It follows conviction." She locked up for the night, her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass door. Somewhere she knew, other stories were waiting. Other voices still trapped in boxes of evidence, waiting for someone to listen. As she drove away, the radio played softly, an old 1970s ballad about time and memory. The road ahead was empty, winding through the quiet hills, illuminated only by her headlights. And in that silence, Detective Evelyn Hart finally allowed herself to breathe. The evening sun dipped low over Beckley, casting long orange streaks across the quiet Appalachian hills. The air carried that familiar small-town hum, a mix of traffic, cicadas, and faraway laughter. Yet, beneath that calm, the town still pulsed with something else, the aftershock of truth. Detective Evelyn Hart stood before the newly unveiled memorial, her reflection faintly visible in the polished marble. It read, "Laura Bennett, 1956-1977, vanished, found, remembered." The crowd around her had thinned. Candles still flickered, their light trembling in the warm air. For months, people had been coming here, not just locals, but visitors from all over the state. Drawn by the story, it had shaken West Virginia and rekindled faith in justice. Hart placed a single white rose at the base of the stone and exhaled slowly. "We found you," she whispered, "and we'll keep finding the rest." In the months following the official case closure, Beckley went through a transformation unlike anything it had experienced in decades. Local news called it the healing of Beckley. Residents who had spent their entire lives shadowed by Laura's disappearance began reopening their memories. Stories surfaced that had been buried for years. People recalling Holloway's presence at the diner, his habit of showing up uninvited at neighborhood gatherings, his strange insistence on volunteering in search parties. The betrayal stung deeply. For years, Holloway had been described as dependable, a man who'd help repair a roof or give a ride home from church. The realization that he'd used that kindness as camouflage disturbed everyone. "It's not just what he did," one elderly neighbor told a reporter. "It's how easily he fooled us all." Detective Hart received dozens of letters from residents thanking her, but she couldn't shake the weight of one thought. What if Holloway wasn't the only one who had blended in this way? How many other small towns carried ghosts disguised as good men? She made it her mission to find out. The West Virginia Cold Case Division, newly formed and funded largely because of Laura's story, began operations that fall. Hart was appointed lead investigator, a decision supported unanimously by the state police board. The division started with 60 unsolved homicides, most dating from the 1960s to early 2000s. Her first act as director was to adopt a motto, one inspired by Laura's case. She had it painted above the door of the division's headquarters. Truth waits longer than lies can hide. Inside, she recruited a hand-picked team, analysts, forensic genealogists, and retired detectives who refuse to let time be an excuse. "We're not chasing ghosts," she told them during their first briefing. "We're answering questions that never should have gone unanswered." One of those analysts, Jacob Myers, was the same lab technician who had identified Holloway's DNA match. He became the backbone of the team's genetic genealogy unit. "It started with Laura," he said. "Now it's a blueprint for how we handle every case that time forgot." The Bennett family also found new purpose. David Bennett transformed his grief into advocacy, launching the Laura Project, a nonprofit connecting cold case families to resources and media support. Its tagline read, "Because waiting shouldn't last forever." When the organization hosted its first memorial fundraiser, more than 400 people attended. Among them were families from as far as Kentucky, Ohio, and Virginia, all carrying photos of loved ones still missing. David spoke briefly at the event. His voice trembled but carried strength. "My sister's case wasn't solved by luck. It was solved by persistence. And persistence is something every family here has. Don't stop asking questions. Don't stop pushing. The truth doesn't give up, so neither can we." The audience rose in applause. Many wept openly. Later, when a journalist asked David how it felt to finally have closure, he said, "Closure isn't an ending. It's a door opening for others to find what we did." Detective Hart continued to balance her growing responsibilities with the emotional gravity of what had happened. She was invited to speak at conferences nationwide. Her talk, titled "The 46-Year Wait: The Power of Preserved Evidence," became one of the most watched presentations in forensic circles. She told the audience, "This case was solved because someone in 1977 decided to seal a box correctly. Sometimes, justice depends on the smallest act of care." She was met with a standing ovation, but after every round of applause, she always returned home quietly, retreating into the stillness of her Beckley apartment. The same routine, the same cup of black coffee, the same photo of Laura Bennett framed on her desk. By 2025, the story had spread far beyond West Virginia. A documentary titled "Justice After 46 Years" premiered on a major streaming service. It featured interviews with Laura's friends, surviving relatives, and Detective Hart herself. Critics called it haunting, honest, and deeply human. Within a month, it ranked among the top true crime series worldwide. In one scene, Hart walked through the fog-covered woods near the New River Gorge, retracing the route where Laura's remains were found. Her voice-over echoed, "The woods don't remember, but evidence does. The ground doesn't speak, but truth does. All it needs is someone willing to listen." The documentary's final image showed Hart standing under the memorial lights, eyes closed, as the words "Justice After 46 Years" faded onto the screen. The world had turned Laura's tragedy into inspiration. Donations poured into the cold case division, funding a new forensic lab in Charleston, the Bennett Forensic Center, dedicated to training investigators in evidence preservation and genealogical testing. Still, Hart never viewed the case as her triumph. When a news anchor called her a hero, she corrected him immediately. Laura's mother, Martha, was the hero, she said. She kept writing letters for 25 years after everyone else gave up. I just happened to open the right one at the right time. That humility became part of her legend. New recruits entering the cold case division were required to read the Bennett case study in their first week. The file ended with a handwritten note from Hart herself. "The day you forget this is about people, not paperwork. You stop being a detective." In late 2025, Beckley held its first annual Truth Vigil, marking the day Laura's killer was officially identified. Hundreds gathered with candles in front of the diner, where she'd worked her last shift. The old neon sign still flickered faintly. David Bennett spoke again, this time with a small smile. "For years, I imagined this place as the last time anyone saw her alive. Now I see it as where her story began." He turned toward Hart in the crowd. "She gave us the ending," he said, his voice catching. "But she also gave us back our beginning." The crowd stood silent, then broke into applause that echoed through the narrow downtown streets. After the ceremony, Hart stayed behind. The crowd dispersed, the lights dimmed, and only a few candles remained burning on the diner steps. She sat on the curb, the cool night air brushing against her jacket. She thought about the countless unsolved cases still waiting, thousands of families still suspended in time. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jacob Myers. "DNA match, 1983 case, female victim. Partial confirmation. Possible lead." Hart smiled faintly, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by resolve. "All right," she whispered. "Let's find another one." She stood, blowing out the last candle before walking back to her car. The sound of crickets filled the night, and as she drove away, the headlights carved through the mist like a promise, another truth waiting to be uncovered. Weeks later, she returned to the Bennett Forensic Center to give a lecture to a new batch of investigators. On the screen behind her was a photo of Laura Bennett. "You'll hear about the technology, the DNA, the databases," she said, pacing slowly. "But don't forget, it started because one detective refused to ignore an old box." She paused, looking at the audience. "And remember this, truth has patience, more than we do, but it always finds a way." As the class rose to applaud, she stepped away from the podium and quietly left the room. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft, steady flakes descending over the town that had finally learned how to sleep again. Hart drove out toward the edge of Beckley, where the road curved near the gorge. She parked, stepped out, and stared into the darkness where the river flowed far below. The world was silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You waited 46 years, but we found you, and now we'll keep finding them." A single tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away, smiled, and turned back toward her car, ready for the next file, the next voice, the next truth. Because for Detective Evelyn Hart, justice wasn't a destination, it was a pursuit, one that never stopped moving, no matter how many years had passed. And somewhere beyond the hills, beneath the quiet West Virginia sky, justice waited, patient as ever.